Hi you guys, and welcome back to another true crime and makeup time video. If you're new here, my name is Zara and I post a new true crime video every single week. So if you love makeup and you love true crime, definitely hit that subscribe button, guys. It would mean so much to me. You have no idea. And yeah, leave me a comment below if you have any cool case suggestions, if you think I should be talking about something and I'm not talking about it, so definitely leave it down below. So today's case was requested by Lyra M, and I love your name, Lyra. I have never heard about this case before, and honestly, especially here in Australia, if I'm trying to go out and look for good information on this case, it was really hard to find. It's a really sad and horrific case of a young mother who was brutally murdered and how the police department handling this case completely fumbled it. I'm talking about dropped the ball in a major way. It took a local homemaker named Susan Goldbreath to finally make a break in this case and get it going. It's a super interesting case and I definitely think it deserves to be talked about more. So let's just get into the case and let's talk about Jessica Currin. Also, before we actually get into it, if I miss some bits or I get things incorrect, keep in mind again, I'm in Australia and the internet should be the internet, but there are some things that I don't have access to. So if, something is incorrect or I misspoke, definitely just correct me in the comments, be nice. Okay, so Jessica Melissa Currin was born on 29th November 1981, and she was a beautiful young woman who lived in the small town of Mayfield, Kentucky. Her father was the town fire chief, Joe Currin, and her mother was Jean Currin. And Jessica, she grew up in a really loving and supportive family. Mayfield is a small town, its population 10,000. There was one church for every 243 residents. Apparently, Walmart's entrance into the community has killed a lot of the few local stores that were left. A handful of public canteens sell, all you can eat catfish and fried chicken and fries for a few bucks. And that's one thing I definitely miss about America. Over there, everything food is so cheap. And in Australia, if you want to eat fried chicken and fries, for one piece of chicken and fries, you'll probably spend at a good place, you probably want to spend $17 to $18, maybe even $20 without a drink. It is insane how expensive food is here. And in America, it is, especially at local places, those are the good spots, those are the good places. Mayfield was, a decent, God-fearing community. It was a nice little town. And it was pretty racially mixed, but they didn't have racial tension, according to my sources. So when Jessica was around 16, 17 years old, she got pregnant and she gave birth when she was 19. And she gave birth to a beautiful baby boy named Zion. And I love that name, especially Lauryn Hill's song, you know what I'm saying? Jessica believed Zion's father to be this guy named Jeremy Adams. And Jeremy was a petty criminal, small-time drug user. And he allegedly had sociopathic personality disorder. So Jessica and Jeremy, they didn't have the best relationship and they couldn't make their relationship work. So they just ended things. So when this happened, Jessica, she dropped out of high school to, make a living for herself and her new baby, Zion. She got a job and she worked really hard to just support herself and Zion. And to be honest, she was so young and it's hard to raise a child at any age. But at the age of under 18, that's pretty respectable. Jessica took her role in motherhood so naturally and with such determination to give her son a good life. And not only her son, she was determined to make a good life for the both of them. On 1st August 2000, the local police, they were called to Mayfield High School because there were reports of something horrific. A body was found in the school field, a body of a young African-American woman. The body was badly burnt, mutilated, and quickly decomposing. Her clothes and her skin were burned. Blisters were covering her arms, and her pants had been ripped off but were placed by the side of her. Her face was in pain, her eyes were bulging, and her tongue was completely protruding out of her mouth. There were deep bludgeon marks to the back of her head, and her nose was completely broken, and there was a black belt tied around her neck that was badly burned, and a bottle of petrol was placed at her feet. This body was identified as Jessica Currin, 18 years old, the daughter of Mayfield's local fire chief, who had been bludgeoned, stabbed, strangled, and burned to death. And they couldn't identify the actual cause of death. And I mean, obviously, the town of Mayfield was like shocked by this. It's not that they were new to crime, but it was more so the type of crime. Crimes in the town were mostly drug or theft related, never something like this. And the fact that someone in their community would do this to someone from their community, like, I think that would have been the hardest thing to deal with in a small town. When patrolman Tim Fortner first saw her, he actually just thought it was like a mannequin. He stated it looked like a plastic sort of frame that just began to melt in the sun. That's how badly it was burned. Tim, he was 31 years old at the time, and he had never seen anything like that before. His police background was minimal. He had been a deputy jailer before being assigned to the force, and he had completed his education without a degree. Keep in mind that Tim was described by his boss as not the brightest bulb in the box. So imagine his surprise when his boss informs him that he, a patrolman who had never had a single day's training in investigation, was assigned to this case, this murder case. Tim stated that he didn't have a clue what to do next. He had no idea how to organize a crime scene or look for evidence or even like contain evidence. He said he was scared stiff, and looking back now, he believes that the only reason he possibly was chosen as the lead in the case was perhaps because no one wanted this case solved. Now, like I said, this body was found in the local school grounds, and obviously if Tim did not know how to secure a crime scene, things like that, I'm guessing people were flocking to the area and were, looking at the crime scene. One of these women was Susan Goldbreath, and Susan, at the time, she was 40 years old. Her life had spiraled into like a life of like purposelessness. She had no fixed ambitions, targets, or goals. In the year 2000, she had 2 failed marriages, 1 son, and she had moved from Chicago to Mayfield. Her third husband was an alcoholic, and that relationship also was like dwindling. She hadn't worked for 2 years due to an illness and didn't really have a background in anything. Like, she had no fixed training. Like, basically, she says her life was just kind of like, what am I doing? So that morning when the body was found, August 1st, 2000, she was having coffee in like a local shop. The waitress mentions there's been this body that's been found and, it's been badly burned, things like that. And Susan somehow was drawn to it. And it was a decision that changed her life completely. She said she believes nothing happens by chance, and that she had an instinct that day and she felt like she had to follow it. In the past, she says she always ignored her instinct, and that's probably why her life led her to where it led her. She said this time she let her instinct actually lead her, and she can't tell you why, but her instinct was telling her to go and look at the body for herself. So she goes and she sees Jessica's body. At the time, it wasn't identified, obviously, so she didn't know who it was. And she says it was like a horrific sight. I'm sure seeing a burnt body, that's not going to be a pretty sight. And she says she still doesn't understand like why what happened or how she felt, like why she felt that way. But she started to cry, and most people would be repelled, you'd walk away, you wouldn't want to look at it. But something led her there, and when she saw the body, it wasn't like the end, it was the beginning of something. She didn't know who the girl was. She had never shown an interest in crime, but she feels like the spirit of the victim somehow entered her body, and she felt that it transformed her and it made her determined to expose something where in the near future was just going to be handled horribly. The local police investigation was a disaster, like terrible. The crime scene obviously had a ton of forensic evidence around it. 6 meters from Jessica's corpse, there was like a substantial amount of human hair that was ripped from like the actual head of the human laying next to Jessica. And it was labeled number 9 by Tim. But when they went back to look for it, it never made it to the police station. It was lost or it was stolen. and it was never seen again. Material including, DNA from her nails. There was a strand of hair like in her hands, DNA underneath her fingernails, the plastic bottle with the petrol. All this stuff was saved, taken in for examination by this department, but somehow it didn't reveal anything useful. Not a single fingerprint, nothing that was going to help this case. And then once inside the Mayfield police station, that box of evidence somehow becomes contaminated. Evidence from other cases was put in it. Some of the evidence was lost. And 2 sexual assault swab tests, like evidence things, were placed inside the Jessica Currin evidence box. Why? Tim continued this investigation despite all this blundering of the evidence, but there was no breakthrough. Nothing was coming up in terms of helping find out what really happened to Jessica. The body was such a mess and her genitals were so badly burned that they couldn't actually determine whether an assault had taken place, but it was suspected that she most likely had been. Now, I understand the forensic side of things. Her body was so badly burned, a lot of evidence does get destroyed that way, but boxes of evidence, even that chunk of hair from the crime scene, how do these things end up lost or contaminated? This is your whole job. Your whole job. I understand Tim was a novice, but he wouldn't have been the one doing everything. There would have been a team of people around him, even if there was 2 people with him. How did everyone mess up? You had to have a team that was in charge of labeling or storing the evidence. In terms of the sexual assault, some places say okay, they couldn't really determine it, but then some places say that there was evidence that she was assaulted by multiple people. But those swabs of that, assault were tossed in with other crime swabs. So hence they were now contaminated. And I guess we can't look at these now because they're contaminated. They're of no use to us. Are all the policemen dumb? It almost seems like this was done on purpose and just nobody did anything about it. And I'm guessing Tim had a little bit of pressure on him. So in desperation, he chose the most obvious suspect, Jeremy Adams, Jessica's baby daddy, and decided to check him out. So Jeremy was free on the night of the murder, but he went to prison the following day on unrelated charges. So we know that Jessica and Jeremy were not together anymore. And it's alleged that Jessica was threatening to tell Jeremy's current girlfriend that he fathered Zion. So what it seems like is that they were not in an official relationship. Jeremy was probably cheating and got Jessica pregnant. So now Jessica's threatening to tell Jeremy's current girlfriend, you fathered this child, blah, blah, blah. So according to Tim, this was Jeremy's reason to have a motive to bludgeon and kill Jessica to prevent her from doing this. So when Jeremy was in jail, Tim goes and decides to visit Jeremy and show him pictures of the crime scene. He thinks by doing this, it's going to refresh Jeremy's memory about what happened that night. So obviously, the pictures are horrific because of the horrific crime. And it was not a complete shock that after seeing these pictures, Jeremy goes ahead to tell his cellmate about this and this is what happened to Jessica. This is what happened to her body. This is what I saw. But his cellmate, his name was Jesse Roberts. He was a snitch or a police informant. And within days, Jesse, he goes and he tells the police about what Jeremy had told him. And he said, you know what? My cellmate Jeremy, he's talking about the Jessica murder. He knows much more about it. You should check him out. Which, of course, he knew a great deal about the murder because he had just seen pictures about it. And obviously, I'm guessing Tim told him a little bit more here and there. So, Jeremy's going to be describing it. On the basis of this single piece of evidence, Jeremy describing the crime scene, a grand jury was convened and they recommended the indictment of Jeremy for the murder of Jessica. So on February 15th, 2001, 20-year-old Jeremy was charged with murder, tampering with evidence, and the abuse of a corpse. 1 year later, the trial begins. And on the first day, the case collapsed because it was discovered that Tim and the Mayfield police withheld like 18 pieces of crucial evidence, and they withheld this from the defense's side, and the judge was so angry, he threatened to even jail Tim for his stupidity. The judge even stated that he had never seen a case with so many problems and that he hopes he never sees another one like that again. After this, Tim, he then quit the force because of like how disgraced he was. So the evidence that was actually withheld from the defense's side was pretty serious. Even though Tim was like blundering and fumbling and, it actually showed that he was actually leading like a separate investigation parallel to the one he was already conducting that was filled with flaws. But he had found 2 likely suspects, and he almost like maybe perhaps would have stumbled across the truth. And his evidence was that 2 men most certainly picked her up on the night of the crime, and they sexually assaulted her. And when she refused or protested, they, bludgeoned her, stabbed her, strangled her, and then burned her to death to get rid of the evidence, and possibly drugs were involved in this encounter. Now, another part of the case that Tim and his team dropped the ball on was that a woman named Victoria Caldwell actually approached the Mayfield police and said that they had some information on this case and wanted to discuss it. However, Victoria said that she was really, really afraid to speak because perhaps she would be targeted, if she gave any information relating to what happened to Jessica. So surprisingly, Tim does one thing good. He puts Victoria into protective custody, but days before she was actually about to go and speak with the Mayfield police. And that's one thing I don't understand. If she was in protective custody, why did it take days to get the information she had? Why not just say the information and then like be put into protective custody? But anyway, it took days. Days before she was about to give this information, Victoria, she vanishes. So when Victoria vanishes, Tim's like, okay then, and then he just like moves on. Neither him nor the, entire Mayfield Police Department decided to even look for Victoria, find out where she went to, why she left. I mean, she was gone with some possible valuable information, and she already told you she was afraid for her life, and you guys didn't even look for her, so all right. So 2.5 years after this shitty police work and the embarrassment of Tim, he resigns and a new department takes over Jessica's case. And it was handed over to Detective Jamie Mills of the Kentucky Police Department. But even then, when it was handed over, there was no progress. Like nothing really happened. Now, after Jessica's case fell flat, it almost seemed like Jessica was just destined to... her case was just destined to be a cold case. Jessica's parents, especially her father, was adamant in keeping, Jessica's case alive by staging protests at local, federal, and even state offices. They were determined not to let Jessica's murder just get buried into like piles and piles of files and disappear into just nothingness. The fact that Joe was also the town's fire chief also put a little bit of pressure on the departments, as well as the protests within the Mayfield's Black community. I mean, why are you not investigating or working harder on this case? Just seemed convenient. They felt no one was doing anything about this case because it involved, a minority, a young Black woman that no one wanted to fight for. In 2004, Joe, Jessica's father, convinced the newly appointed Attorney General to take over and handle this horribly fumbled case. Now, you guys remember Susan? Your regular schmegular homegirl in town, chilling, minding her business. Well, not really, because she couldn't stop thinking about Jessica after she saw her body. In fact, she had made it her mission to solve Jessica's murder. At least someone did. In the course of 6 years that had gone by, Susan reached out to everyone she could. She would ask everyone if they had, did you hear any rumors about Jessica's murder? Did you happen to see anything that night? And whenever people would tell her anything, she would write every single thing down. She even wrote letters to celebrities like Oprah and even to Dateline. And eventually she wrote to this British journalist. His name was Tom Mangold, and she did this because she thought, okay, it's time, like I need some help. I mean, she was someone with no investigative experience. So Tom, this British journalist, he ends up flying to Mayfield And he helped Susan because he was so intrigued by this case. And according to Tom, they just made like the strangest pair in Mayfield. He was tall with gray hair and he had like this little limp with like a very obvious accent. And most Kentuckians like didn't even understand him. Whereas Susan was short, blonde, and super feisty. And the two of them, they, walked around the town. They're little detectives and they would just ask questions about Jessica all the time. After which they would always sort of return back to Tom's hotel and like have a couple of drinks and just discuss everything that they had encountered that day. After 2 weeks of like serious researching together, Susan and Tom, they noticed that the same name kept popping up, the same man's name. And it was a man named Quincy Cross. And he was a drug dealer and he lived close by in Tennessee. And at this stage, they had enough evidence to suggest that Quincy Cross and others had probably murdered Jessica in like a sex and drug-fueled attack. So the Mayfield Police Department was obviously of no use. So they ended up taking the evidence that they had to the Kentucky Police Department. And so they go there, they give the police officer there the information and they're like, you know what, I think we figured this out. Like, this is what we have, blah, blah, blah. And the staff of the station were just like, all right, cool. And Tom and Susan were like, okay, well, this obviously isn't going anywhere, but they don't know what else to do. What else are you supposed to do? The police are supposed to help you, right? So at this point, after 2 weeks, Tom, he had to return to England and they promised to just keep in touch with each other. And Susan at this stage was really determined to figure out what Quincy Cross's involvement was in this case and if he was the killer, to bring him to justice. So then one evening, Susan, she drops a bombshell to Tom. She tells him that she thinks, or she knows, that Quincy had been stalking her. She had seen him a few times outside her own home and he was just staring at her. Instead of being terrified, I mean, if you look at this guy, he's not very friendly looking. Susan was like, hell nah, I'm going to confront him. Tom, he goes crazy and he's like, what are you doing? Like, don't be stupid. You need to report this to the police. But Susan refused. So Tom, he decides, okay, if you're going to do this anyway, I'm going to help you, meet Quincy, but we're going to trick him. We're not going to tell him the truth. So Susan would tell a cousin of Quincy, whom she had just known separately, that Tom was writing a book about Jessica Currin's case and that this was Quincy's chance to clear his name because his name kept popping up everywhere. Susan was going to tell the cousin that she was Tom's book researcher. Tom then begged Susan to just tell the Kentucky police like that we're doing this, just tell them. So finally she agrees and then the Kentucky Police Department says, okay, let's fit you with the wire. They fit Susan with the wire. She was to meet Quincy at his house and the police department were going to wait around the corner in an unmarked car. And she would use the code, I wish my brother was here, as like a signal code word for help if something was to go wrong. So on 25th February 2005, Susan goes to meet with Quincy. And sorry, she didn't meet with him at his house. I meant his cousin's house. So she goes to the cousin's house and Quincy's there waiting for her, except he was alone. The cousin wasn't there. And Quincy and Susan sit down to talk. And Susan then remembers something that Tom had told her, where he said that most people just don't confess. The best thing you can do is trick them into saying something that they just shouldn't have. And so now, they're talking, and whenever Susan brings up the topic of Jessica's body, Quincy's just like, I don't want to hear that shit. He just keeps saying that. And then he'd get up and like walk around the room and like get kind of like stressed about it. At one stage, he says to Susan, I'm telling you everything and you're telling me nothing. He goes like, did they find any DNA on that, gas bottle? And it seemed like Quincy was just trying to see what information Susan already had, because whatever information she had, the police would have. And then Susan was like, wait a second. No one had ever mentioned the gas bottle laying next to Jessica's body. Like, how did he know about that? And then as they kept talking, he tells Susan that he knew, I don't know why, exactly what type of belt that was used on Jessica. He says it was just like this, and he points to his own belt that he was wearing, and it was a black braided belt. And then Susan was like, we have him. No one has ever revealed that the belt used on Jessica was a black braided belt. Like, why are people so dumb? Honestly. Now, some people can say like, oh, maybe he saw it like Susan saw it, but the belt and the body was so badly burned that that wouldn't have been determined so easily just from looking at it. And that this, like the type of belt was only found when it was really, really investigated by forensics. Susan knew about this because she had actually been given the police files and she had looked through everything. So Susan was like, oh my God, I got like the best information. Like she's like, I won. But the Kentucky Police Department was like, no, this isn't enough to get Quincy. So Susan was like devastated by this, so devastated. And she was like, I really thought we had him. But she kind of like lost a bit of faith at that point. At this point, it was more than 5 years since Jessica had been murdered. Now, at this point, most of Mayfield felt like Quincy had something to do with Jessica's murder. Like all leads were pointing towards him, but it just seemed like there was nothing that could be done. Everything was signaling that he was the one that did it, but yet he still just remained a free man. So then in 2006, Susan did something very clever. She creates a MySpace page dedicated to Jessica, and it was called Justice for Jessica. And she did this to, honor Jessica's memory, but essentially she'll also do this to create a forum where it could possibly coax a witness to just come forward and reveal something. So then in February 2007, she gets a lead. A woman leaves a comment that reads as follows: I will help the police as much as I can, but I really don't know who to trust. I'm afraid someone might kill me if I testify to things about this. Can you help me? This woman was Victoria Caldwell. Remember her? She went missing. Susan manages to get Victoria's number. She calls her and very gently she questions her. And Victoria then admits to Susan, I know what happened to Jessica. And then the rest happened super quickly. The Kentucky Police Department sends someone over to grab Victoria, bring her from California to Mayfield, and she gave a full confession. So here's what Victoria states happened on that night. She says, on the evening of 30th July 2000, she was at her cousin Tamara's house, and as she's chilling there, Quincy turns up. And Victoria knew Quincy because he had sold drugs to members of her family. What the hell is on me? So when Quincy comes into the home, he begins kissing on and groping Tamara. And Tamara refuses his advances. And as she does that, Quincy becomes pissed. And Tamara then points at Victoria and says, you can kiss on her. Victoria was 14 at the time and she was just sitting in a back bedroom listening to music. She tells him, you can kiss on her. Tamara runs off and then shuts Quincy and Victoria in that bedroom that Victoria was sitting in. Quincy then sexually assaults Victoria and then leaves the house after he's done. Victoria then takes a shower, and then later on in the evening, Quincy returns to the home. This time he comes with his friend, Jeffrey Burton. Tamara comes out and tells Victoria, Quincy just told me he's about to kill someone tonight. And apparently no one was surprised by this because Quincy said this kind of stuff all the time. So no one really paid him any attention. Victoria then has to go home because her sister calls her and she's like, where are you? You need to come home. So Victoria leaves the house, leaves Tamara's house, goes home. Late into the night, that same night, Tamara comes back to Victoria's house, comes in and asks Victoria hey, do you want to go for a drive? That's when Victoria gets into Quincy Cross's large old white Cadillac. So then the night of the murder, Jessica Currin, 18 at the time, she had been walking home after spending some time with her friend Venetia Stubblefield, and she had actually been at Venetia's house and they had been playing cards all night. So her apartment block was 2.4 kilometers away. So she starts walking back home that night at around 1:50 a.m. And that's when she was stopped by Quincy Cross and offered a ride home. Quincy Cross at the time, he was 25 years old, serial hard drug user, and he was also a sexual offender. Also in the car were 4 other people, one man, Jeffrey Burton, 3 girls, Victoria Caldwell, Tamara Caldwell, and Venetia Stubblefield. Victoria was 14 years old and Venetia and Tamara were all in their late teens. So Venetia was allegedly picked up by Quincy at her home after Jessica left. And as they were driving, Venetia directs Quincy in the direction that Jessica would have been walking home. And it was allegedly Venetia who convinced Jessica to get into the car that night. Once Jessica was inside the car, she sat in the front seat next to Quincy, the driver, and Tamara, Victoria's cousin. And immediately, Tamara and Quincy begin to touch and grope Jessica's legs. And they were trying to get Jessica to have sex. I mean, Quincy, you literally just had sex. Like, you raped someone, but you literally just... Anyway. So Jessica, she refused and she pushed Quincy's hand away. All four of them, excluding Jessica, were using ecstasy, cocaine, and alcohol that night. When Jessica resisted, Quincy got really agitated and he reaches under his driver's seat in the car and he pulls out a small baseball bat. He then smashed the baseball bat into the back of Jessica's head and she was unconscious. They then drove to Jeffrey Burton's house where an insane assault took place. Jeffrey goes up and he opens the door to the home, and it was Tamara and Quincy who carried the unconscious Jessica into the home. Quincy, Jeffrey, and Tamara all take Jessica into the back bedroom of the house, while Venetia and Victoria, they just waited in the living room. And Victoria claims that at this point she saw all three of them, Tamara, Jeffrey, and Quincy, sexually assault Jessica in that bedroom. And they did this while she was still unconscious. As Quincy raped Jessica, he takes his black braided belt off and he wraps it around Jessica's neck. Jessica remained unconscious for most of the attack, but as she regained a little bit of consciousness, she pleaded with them, don't do this. I have a little boy, Zion, just don't do this. She said, I want to go home. Quincy ignored her. He beats her with a spanner. After this, she dies. And after she dies, several acts of necrophilia were performed on her by Quincy, Tamara, and Jeffrey, which, again, I say this all the time. How did three people find that they were all turned on by this? You guys just, joined a club? I don't understand. Maybe they didn't know she was dead, but I don't understand how this is a turn on. But anyway, when it was over, they took her body to their garage, Jeffrey's garage. They dumped it over there and they covered her body in trash. And then what else did they do? They went back and partied. The following evening, Jessica's now decomposing body was taken to the Mayfield School's playing field, dumped there, petrol poured all over it, and they burned her body. The body was then found the next day on August 1st. Victoria actually claimed that she and Venetia, they wanted to leave, but Quincy, he wouldn't let them because he said everyone that is here has to play a part in the assault because all of you need to stay quiet after it. If you all have done something, then none of you will talk. In 2007, around 5 months after taking over the case, that new attorney general then announces 5 arrests. Quincy Cross, who was now 31, Tamara Caldwell, and Jeffrey Burton, who were both 27. They were charged with murder, kidnapping, first-degree rape, tampering with evidence, and the abuse of a corpse. Victoria and Venetia were also charged, and all 5 of them pleaded not guilty. In March 2007, Quincy got life without parole, and Jeffrey and Tamara got 5 to 10 years for manslaughter after they struck up a plea deal. Victoria was sentenced to 5 years for evidence tampering, and she got such a small sentence because, she gave evidence and she cooperated with police. Venetia, Jessica's friend, who seemingly, you wouldn't say she caused the whole thing, but she essentially led them to Jessica. And in my eyes, she's responsible for causing her death as well. But she got 7 years for tampering with evidence and abuse of a corpse. Now, Venetia and Victoria, they did do something to the body, but I couldn't find out exactly what. I think, like I said, Quincy threatened them that, you need to do something to Jessica's body. So you guys are implicated too, which is why they got, the abuse of a corpse charge. But I don't know exactly what they did. And I'm just like, oh my God, imagine having to do that to your own friend. And even though she may regret it, she wasn't thinking straight. Maybe she didn't, I don't think she thought that was going to happen to Jessica, you know? But it still doesn't make her any less responsible in a way. Joe Currin and his wife, Jean, who are now retired, they focused majority of their life on raising Jessica's son, Zion. He now must be in his 20s, but he calls them mom and dad. And I'm not sure when they would have told him about his mother's death. I'm sure by now he knows, which is just so sad. Joe and Jean shouldn't have had to fight so hard for Jessica's case to have been dealt with correctly. And one of their thoughts were if they didn't push for it, till this day, it probably never would have been solved. They don't even believe that it would have even gotten started if they hadn't pushed as hard as they did. They shouldn't have had to do that. Susan was formally presented with an Outstanding Citizen Award in 2007 for her services on bringing Jessica Currin's case to justice. Susan states that it was the proudest day in her life, and I'm sure it would have been. I mean, imagine being the one that helped solve an unsolvable case. Susan had then found a new partner in her life who she was very happy with. She solved a hideous crime almost single-handedly. She would have been a great detective. Sadly, Susan passed away in 2018 due to natural causes, but she was an amazing woman, you know, to do all that work, research, and put yourself in dangerous positions. I mean, one small slip and you don't know what would have happened that day with Quincy when she met him. Like, that was so dangerous. Doing all this, putting your own life in danger just for someone you don't even know, you know, and that's justice. Susan was amazing. So this case makes me so angry because that happened like decades ago, two decades ago. And it still happens to this day. There are so many cases with minorities that we don't even hear about, you know? And it's like, what can be done about it if the people that are meant to be protecting you and bringing justice don't do the right thing? It's just really upsetting. And I'm sure it takes place in many countries, but especially in Western countries, Australia, the US, like these things happen. And it's really frustrating that it took Susan, someone who, if she never even stumbled across hearing about what happened or going and seeing Jessica's body, what would have happened? Jessica's case would never have been solved. You know what I mean? And when Tim, the police guy, said that he believed that no one wanted this case to be solved, I wonder why, if Joe Currin was the fire chief, like, wouldn't that have been all the more reason to not have this like high publicity case like lingering any longer? And then didn't Quincy know, or whoever, like Tamara and Victoria, didn't they know that Jessica was the police chief's daughter? I mean, the fire chief's daughter? Like, that alone should have been a reason not to do that to her. But clearly these people had no like sense. Clearly, I mean, they could blame it on the drugs, but drugs don't make you do that crazy thing, okay? You have to have that sick shit in you, you know? I would love to hear your thoughts on this case down below, guys. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of comments if YouTube even shows this video to people, but I'm sure you guys are going to have a lot of comments. And thank you, Lyra, again for suggesting this case. I am so glad I read about it and I know about Jessica's case. So thank you guys so much for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. And I will see you in the next one. Besitos. Mwah. Bye.